have Steve Brown on the program. Thanks for coming today, Steve.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Glad to get another bald guy on the program, right?
All the best people are, yeah.
The bald futurist. So I can tell from the accent, you're British, but I know you've got a thing with Oregon, and I feel like there's a story. Why Oregon, and why is that so important to you?
It's sort of random. I worked for Intel for 30 years, and Intel's largest facility is here in Oregon. And so I used to come visit. I worked for Intel in the UK. I used to visit here every 3 months or so. I'd come and spend a week, and I just loved it here. As a European, it's not Europe in Oregon, but it has some European things about it here in Portland, in that it's got good public transport, and it's got beer and wine, wine country, green parks. So it sort of I feel at home here. And my thing about Oregon is it's the thing about my home. I've chosen to make this my home. And if it's going to be my home, then I'm going to do what I can to help make it a better home. So anytime I do talks in the state of Oregon, I normally sort of cut my fees. I do work with local educators. I do work with local government to try and help do my part as a citizen. I'm now a US citizen to help contribute.
So Oregon, you were there for Intel as a chief evangelist. What in God's name is an evangelist other than that guy on TV?
Yeah, it's not that praise be evangelism type of stuff. It was a role that was really chief cheerleader. So my job was to travel around the world to visit all of Intel's facilities, to spend time with Intel's employees, and to help them sort of understand their role in the world. So I would spend time explaining, where's the world going? Where's the world of tech going? Where's Intel going? And therefore, where are they going? And it was designed as a way to help them see a very clear link between the work that they did and the impact that they had in the world, and why it was important. That's essentially the job.
What do you think about what's happened with Intel and the whole Apple deal lately?
It's unfortunate. I mean, I think it didn't necessarily get reported in the press the way. The full story is that Intel is out of the mobile 5G modem business for smartphones, but it's still going to stay in 5G. I think it's still strategic. I've been gone from the company for 3.5 years now, so I don't have any inside scoop. But it's just one of those things that happens in the industry. Sometimes things don't work out. I think Intel was late to market, and Apple had to make some tough calls.
Yeah, that's how it works sometimes. How do you think about that, transitioning from one of the big players to being someone who tries to help the big players succeed? You kind of become a mercenary, but yet you can accomplish more?
I'm not fettered anymore. I'm not imbued with Intel's worldview. I have my own worldview, which I think is different. And I get to interact with a lot more different customers. If you work for Intel, you tend to spend a lot of time talking with Intel's customers and maybe their customers. Now I'm spending time talking with all kinds of really interesting organizations. In the last month, I got to inspire school kids in Aruba about how they can participate in the future. I have talked to the International Society of Barristers. I have talked to high-tech companies. I've talked to manufacturers. It's a real mix, and I love that. And I get to help people understand how the world is going to change, and how and what their part can be in that. And I enjoy that way more than any job I ever did at Intel.
So speaking of the future and how the world's going to change, we were talking 5G, we were talking mobile. Where are we headed? I see 5G being this incredible standard that everyone talks about, and they kind of wave their hands in the air as if 5G doesn't really have to mean anything. We can just say 5G and it's all good. It's like version 4, version 5. What is a new version?
Yeah, it's one more G, so it must be better, right? And it's significantly better. But it's not just about making your videos download faster, or just making your phone faster in general. There's lots more that 5G is able to do than that. And we should talk about sort of the broader landscape of technology, but let's hit 5G because I think it's a foundational technology, a little bit like blockchain is a foundational technology upon which other value will be created. 5G is faster, 10 to 100 times faster than 4G LTE. It is more scalable. It is more reliable, so it has much more quality of service capability built in, so you will get less drop signals. But it's more importantly drop signals for machines. So if you are an autonomous vehicle that is pulling data from the network to get a high definition map of where you are right now, it will be able to get that much more reliably without a drop connection. And you'll see these networks scale much better in cities. If you go to, Portland, I get a great quality 4G LTE signal. If I go to San Jose, where there are a lot of people using those connections, it kind of sucks. So it will be much more scalable, but I've saved the best one to last, which is that 5G's latency is much lower. Latency means the time between when I ask for something from the internet and when it comes back to me. That time is going to be a fraction of what it was with 4G. What that means is that a number of applications that weren't possible before are now possible. So remote surgeries, streaming VR and AR. So being able to put funky glasses on and have them be connected and the images be streaming from the cloud. When I move my head, they have to change rapidly. Otherwise, I feel sick and throw up. Having the low latency of 5G will mean that this will be possible. I'll be able to have cloud-based streaming AR, VR, which will going to mean that that will suddenly become a reality.
Which means we'll probably also have cloud-based streaming advertisements popping up just from holographic projectors.
Yeah.
God, it's so dystopian, and it's like I could see it happening. Just it's kind of an inevitability in capitalism, isn't it?
Well, it will be up to us as consumers to decide what we will tolerate. But yeah, if our field of view gets sold to the highest bidder, and our view of the world looks like we're walking down the main street of Vegas every day of our lives, that's clearly not acceptable.
And that's when you move back to Europe and hopefully the EU, because you have a little more protection there.
Well, I think you're going to see a similar reaction here in the States. GDPR, the General Data Protection Act that happened in Europe last year, there are moves in Congress to try and pull something together that's similar here in the States.
What do you think about the whole state-federal government dynamic? So California can make lead illegal, and for the federal government, it can be illegal. So how in God's name do these kind of things interact? It's not something that really happens in Europe unless you consider all of the EU.
Yeah, I'm not the right person to ask about that. The only comment I would have is that it does make it hard for innovators because they have to target the lowest common denominator or highest common denominator. If you're designing a car, you might as well design it to hit Californian standards, for example. Having very fragmented standards for people to go design around just makes it harder for innovators and slows innovation down. So having harmonized stuff at a federal level or even at a global level is going to accelerate innovation.
You brought up blockchain earlier. I know for a lot of the blockchain sites, when people were signing up, you could sign up as long as you weren't in North Korea, Iran, or the state of New York. And it's a little bit absurd how regulation can also hold that stuff back. But how do you see blockchain? I know you said fundamental technology. A, why is it fundamental? And B, will it become valuable, or will it be something like an HTTP?
Great. That's a lot of questions all in one. So I think, yes, it becomes valuable in that I see that artificial intelligence is the new computer, augmented reality is the new display, and blockchain is the new network. That is the way that value might be created in the future in a very distributed, decentralized way. So people often associate blockchains almost exclusively with cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies in and of themselves are pretty dull, I think, as a futurist. Cryptocurrencies sort of sit on top of blockchains. I actually think about it the other way around, which is that cryptocurrencies or tokens are what makes blockchains go, that what enable that immutable platform. It's just a fancy database. That's all blockchain is, a fancy database. You can't change the data in it. It allows you to create that distributed fancy database and then build value on top of that. And we're getting to the point where the latest generation of blockchains do not have the baggage of the previous ones, namely,
get rich quick.
Well, not just that. I mean, yes, there's that ugly patina of stupidity that revolved around those, but I'm talking about the fact that blockchains, to make them go, old blockchains, you needed a ton of energy to make that happen, which meant that they were unsustainable. And they also couldn't handle that many transactions per second. The latest blockchains can handle, maybe 1 million transactions per second or more, and they're designed to not use the same level of electricity that, say, the blockchain that underpins Bitcoin used to use. So we're at the point now where blockchain is 10 years old, and it is mature enough that people will really start to use it to create value in a very different way than they have before.
Is part of the problem with blockchains that people have been trying to optimize for the furthest out scenario to make it 100% perfect versus building something that was close to perfect? I feel like that extra effort that is involved with making it 100% cryptographically secure, 100% we're not going to have these type of split attacks, etc. When you get too into the nitty gritty, you kind of overbuild, so to speak. I mean, let's say you were driving a car. What if we put 12 inches of steel on the outside in case you crash into another car?
Yeah, and I think you're seeing that trade-off. People are realizing maybe I don't need to steel reinforce my tank. I'm just going to be taking the kids to school and back, and the kids are precious, and I got to look after them. But it doesn't need to be in a tank. It can be in a Volvo. And I think we're seeing the Volvo of blockchain emerge now, which is still secure and designed to be safe, but isn't complete overkill.
It's not libertarian anarchy, essentially. There's new people getting into the space that have different ideals.
Yeah.
What technology are you most excited about, and why?
Artificial intelligence, by far. It is going to change all of our lives. It will change the way we all work. It is going to challenge us as a society in that it's going to change the nature of work and put a lot of people out of work, at least in the short to medium term. But it is a very exciting technology because it solves a set of business problems that were not possible before. So the way to think about it is, about 120 years ago, we electrified the world. We got electric lights, refrigeration, all of the benefits. I'm talking to you now because of electricity. About 60 years ago, we got modern digital computers, what I would now call traditional digital computing. And it took a while for that to mature and get into everybody's hands at an amazing price point. That's why we have these things in our pockets and purses now. But about 2010, we had enough computing capability to be able to do artificial intelligence, to take the concept that was created in the 1950s, the algorithms that were largely written in the mid-1980s, and make them go. And that has enabled people to solve a completely different set of problems. So think about it in those terms: electricity, digital computers, artificial intelligence. It's that big of a deal. What you can do with AI, you can start to give computers the ability to see, hear, and understand the world. So machine vision, natural language processing, voice platforms, as well as enabling computers to see more. What I think is really fascinating about artificial intelligence is it's going to enable us to see the world more completely, so that we could have lift the veil on the world and see it in a way where we couldn't see it before. And that's going to have huge implications for the healthcare industry, enabling doctors to see patients more fully, to be able to do diagnostics on them, and for businesses to understand what is happening in their operations and to make decisions in real time. So artificial intelligence to me is the big one. It's also giving computers the ability to have an imagination for the first time, which is going to allow them to create or co-create content in partnership with humans. So it is elevating the status of technology from being a tool that we wield. So, a hammer, PowerPoint is just a fancy hammer, right? I have to tell it everything I want it to do, to a tool which is able to make its own decisions and to contribute at a much higher level, so that it's not subordinate to us. It now becomes a teammate. And that is a massive breakthrough in the way that we even think about technology.
It's a massive breakthrough, but also they ship. Tesla has self-driving, and people are going to sleep and just completely ignoring the fact that you're supposed to pay attention, despite the fact that you tell them, pay attention. Mm-hmm. People put a lot of trust in something that appears to be smart. Like, you have a British accent. Right now, everyone that's listening gives you 10 extra IQ points. If you had a Southern one, you'd probably go 10 points the other direction. Mm-hmm. How do we deal with those cognitive biases we have, where we see this happening right now with the prison system? Oh, shoot, this guy's black, and the algorithm says that black guys are more likely to yada yada than white guy, so let's give him a longer sentence and a higher bail. How do we deal with those type of things? Some of them are obvious now that we've gone through them, but a lot of them won't be obvious, and a lot of people will assume technology is either A, conscious, which we'll get to that later, or B, much smarter than they are.
Yeah, technology is still pretty dumb. And there's a big difference between narrow AI, which is an AI that's able to do one thing and one thing only. So, for example, I can create a narrow AI that will beat the pants off anybody at a game of chess. But you ask that same AI to do something else, drive a car or speak to me, can't do it. It's only narrowly good at one thing. So we're a long way from general AI, where you have an AI that's able to do all the things that a human can do. Those narrow AIs are trained. You don't program an AI. You don't write a program from an AI. You train it using examples, using data. And those examples are typically examples of human behavior. And so they codify everything about us and the way that we would behave in that scenario by giving it examples of how we behaved in the past. So you bring up a great example of the court system. In New Jersey, an AI was created as a way to determine whether someone should get bail or not. They basically got rid of the bail system and the bail bondsman and said, either you should be locked up because we don't think you're safe to go out into society while you stand trial, or you can. It's binary, one or the other. And they used AI to do that. To train that AI, they had to be very careful not to capture human bias in that. And so not only did they make sure that when they fed the data of previous cases into the AI to train it, that they removed all mention of race and gender, they even were smart enough to go, okay, well, address can be a proxy for race. And so they stripped that out as well. So you have to be, when you train an AI, you have to be very mindful that you don't make it as awful as we are. And that's what it comes down to, is humans have bias. And if you're not careful, those AIs will pick up on our biases, the same way our children pick up on our biases, right? I'll give you one more example. Amazon created an AI. They're doing very well, I've heard. And they are hiring like crazy. I know some of the people in senior positions in HR there. And they created an AI, this is public information, I'm not giving anything away here, that could scan resumes, CVs, and decide, is this the kind of person that should be interviewed or not? Based on our history of, here's all the resumes that we've had, here are the people we ended up hiring, who should we interview? And guess what? The AI had a bias against women. Now, that's not the AI's fault. The AI doesn't know the difference between a man and a woman. It doesn't hate women. It doesn't love men. It doesn't, it's not misogynistic. What happened was it revealed the innate, perhaps unconscious biases of people at Amazon who had been making hiring decisions in the past. And I think AI holds a mirror up to us and allows us to see us for who we are. Of course, Amazon had to quickly withdraw that and figure out what went wrong, but really what went wrong was not the coding of the AI. The issue was it highlighted a bias in their people.
It did, and yet we probably won't see these biases before they happen. And then there's the concept of the butterfly effect. I dropped something on the floor, so I reached down to pick it up, and because I picked it up, for some reason, that made me more likely to brush my teeth. And AI finds these type of impossible irregularities, so to speak, that actually lead to some type of trend. So we might be able to say A, B, C, D, E. We want to avoid all those. But shoot, we forgot to look at people that are going to this gym versus this gym, people that go to this coffee shop versus this coffee shop. Guys like this one because it's much more manly. Girls like this one because it has dance classes, etc. Or whatever it is. Is it something where we'll be able to remove that bias?
Well, what you just described isn't bias. What you just described is finding patterns that humans wouldn't see that's hidden inside data. Whether those associations are causative or not, there are associations. There are.
But like they might try to avoid the biases of male versus female, but not realize that the AI is picking on a different variable that identifies male, female, black, white, etc.
Yeah.
Like you got location, but there's a lot of other things outside of location.
Right. And okay, so what's the alternative, right? Do you use humans with all of their biases, or do you attempt to create a decision-making process that is better than a human, but still maybe has some flaws? I don't know. I mean, it's a tough question. But it's the same as if I create a self-driving car that most of the time doesn't crash. Is that good enough? Because if it crashes less than if it was driven by a human, it's still better, right?
I'm just bringing up the tough
No,
philosophical
it's the right
questions.
question. Yeah, it's the right question. But I think what you're scratching away at is that should we hold AI to a higher standard than humans? And maybe we should. But how high is that standard? Is perfection the minimum? And I don't think that that's probably fair.
It's dangerous if that's the minimum.
Yeah. So I think AI is going to give us a lot of breakthroughs. There may be people listening to this podcast right now whose lives will be saved because an AI discovers a drug that will save their lives at some point in the future. If not them, then their children. And so AI is going to do a lot for humanity. And we should be careful about being too fearful of it and shutting down development. I think caution versus fear. We should be cautious, be mindful. We should be aware of bias, and we should be careful to limit to some degree what AI can do. But it is going to be a very powerful tool for us, and I would hate to limit its positive impact on humanity because we're so fearful of negative impact.
I would agree, but it's kind of like the concept of racing your car. What speed do you go at to make sure that you can hit the brakes before you get to the cliff? So we need something on there because the AI prize is trillions, if not whatever the next number system beyond trillions is in terms of the country, the company, et cetera, that comes up with it. They win a lot of games very quickly, especially if we're talking about general intelligence. How do we deal with the safety rails, so to speak? Because it's one thing to go head on and it's one thing to hold back. And I don't think either of those are the right answer. Yet the game that we're playing is kind of like a Pink's all or nothing. You win, I get your car. I win, I get your car type of deal where people will go all out because it is everything.
Yeah. So, part of the problem is that the main face of AI today is deep learning, machine learning, deep learning. The more layers you have, the deeper it gets. And that creates a black box, a neural network black box that we don't really know how it works, right? And an AI can't tell you how it came up with the answer that it did. There's a lot of work to create transparent AIs, which will explain to you why they came up with the conclusion they did. And there's also work beyond deep learning to look at cause and effect, create an AI that understands cause and effect, to create an AI that uses common sense. And so I think it's almost going to put natural guardrails around an AI to give it an understanding of the world, which will naturally limit it and help it sort of keep it on track. So the issues that we have with AI today, with it being this impenetrable, it's kind of magic in the way it works with deep learning, and the sort of the curve fitting that goes on to find associations in complex data types, may be a short-term issue, or let's say medium-term issue, as the other kinds of AI that develop that we can wrap around it.
Understood. Speaking of future of AI and some related topics, I know you've talked about the evolution of government. We certainly need to evolve government. Where are we headed, or where should we be headed?
Well, government needs to speed up. The world has sped up, and yet government plods along. And it is disheartening to see governments, and I'm not just talking about the US government, you see it in other governments around the world as well, although many of them are certainly better than the speed of the US, where their understanding of technology and its impact on the world is clear. Very often politicians talk about the problems that they think they know how to solve. They don't talk about things that they don't have a clue on how to solve. And that's why you're not seeing people talk about automation and the severe impact it has already had on jobs and will continue to have on jobs. I think we need to have more literacy amongst the general population. It's one of the reasons I do what I do. And I think it needs to happen in government. And that's, again, why I spend time mostly at the local level, trying to educate people on, well, this is the technology that's coming. These are the implications. These are the questions we have to answer. I don't purport to have all the answers at all. But at least we can raise the right questions that our politicians will need to talk about and find answers to.
If we can plausibly say that right now we're about at peak usage for what the Earth can handle, and we're at about 7-8 billion people, assuming we go up in efficiency from here, we can't really produce more without causing more problems, or going to Mars, which has all kind of other headaches associated with it.
Yeah.
How do we continue to grow the economy, the GDP, prosperity? Is that even the right metric as we go forward?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Like, do we need more jobs? I mean, if we can produce, if we can all have an American-esque standard of living and none of us are working, what the hell's the problem? Other than we all have to kill each other because we don't have a job.
Well, then it comes down to how is wealth distributed. Right now, wealth is distributed in return for work, right? We create wealth as a society. People work to contribute towards that wealth. And we have this notion of that wealth is distributed based on the level of contribution that somebody makes. And if you're a CEO, then you contribute at a higher level than a frontline worker. That's kind of the notion of the way that we've constructed our society. And that's how capitalism has worked, and it's generated great wealth. And that wealth has been distributed more towards the people who we have determined should have that wealth because they've contributed more and therefore they should be rewarded more. That may change. It may have to change. If we put 50% of the people out of work over the next 20 years, and that's, I'm not being alarmist by saying that, that's something that McKinsey, PwC, lots of other, Oxford University, smart researchers are saying this is a serious issue, that up to 50% of jobs are at high risk of automation. Now, does that mean they will be automated? No, it means they're at high risk. Does it mean that other jobs will not be created as a result of technologies? That's always been the case in the past. You know, we took people off the land and gave them new jobs in factories and offices, and people are now web designers and party planners and make baristas, right? New jobs will emerge as technologies evolve. The question is, will they evolve at the pace that's needed to replace the jobs that are destroyed? And can we train people fast enough? I think this is an education problem. And some people will not be able to rise to the level that's required to do the new jobs. You can't take a truck driver and turn them into a genetic scientist. It's just not going to happen. So if there are people that aren't able to make the jump, either because they can't do it quickly enough, we move people off the land in a 200-year process. We're going to do 50% of the jobs in maybe a 20-year timeframe. If we can't move people quickly enough, or they just aren't able to make that leap, do they become destitute and homeless? Is that the world that we all want to live in? Or do we look at how we distribute wealth differently? And in the US, the political system is
destitute and homeless.
Well, it's not, yeah, it's not predisposed for that. I think Europe, with its evil socialist outlook, which is the way many Americans would characterize it, is much better set up to make this transition than the United States is. That worries me as a US citizen. Many
foolish Americans, I would say. I think as well that this, if it's not solved, it will be the fall of the US. In terms of where we're headed, do you think we can get to, let's say a decent percentage of jobs are automated away in a very quick time frame? Do you think we can get to a world that, assuming we don't replace those jobs, we peacefully transition to a more socialist or UBI type economy, or is it going to have to be something violent like it always has been?
God, I hope not. I mean, it all comes down to choice. We can choose what we want. I have found it helpful, especially when I'm talking to business leaders who tend to be more on the, everybody should work. So personal responsibility. I am all for personal responsibility. But when I explain it in terms of, well, what will happen when half of your customers can no longer afford your product or service, it will affect you too. That's when the penny drops and they go, oh, yeah, okay, we've got to figure this out. Because it affects us all. The economy is all interconnected. And if half of the people suddenly drop out of it over 20 years, it takes everybody else down.
Yeah, it's a reverse Amazon flywheel where it all comes crashing down.
Right. And so we all own a part in doing it. And whether universal basic income, taxing capital, Bill Gates' idea of taxing robots. If a robot replaces a person who earned 50 grand a year, then you tax that robot as if it was earning 50 grand a year. We're going to have to do something radical. Because if we don't, automation will take us all down. Now, I want to accurately represent the other side of the argument, which is Price Waterhouse did a study of the UK, and they estimated that 7 million jobs in the UK would be destroyed by artificial intelligence. Sounds like a pretty evil, awful headline. They also estimated that 7.2 million jobs would be created by artificial intelligence. So net, it's going to create 200,000 jobs. Now, are they going to be high quality jobs, high paying jobs? Will people be able to do those jobs? I don't know. And how quickly can we make that transition? I also don't know, and I don't think anybody does. But we should be fair about it's not all doom and gloom, but there is great uncertainty.
And when you look at these consulting firms, I want to say they assumed there would be like 100,000 cell phones in the entire US after that iPhone came out or something. Just when you look at the numbers, they're off by orders of magnitude almost every time. And that's kind of how technology happens when there is that stepwise change. It's a black swan event, so to speak.
Yeah, and the problems that they're trying to model are incredibly complex. There are so many moving parts and so many assumptions built in that the models could be wildly off. The same way, when we predict a hurricane, we're not quite sure where it's going to make landfall, and different models show different things. In this case, a lot of the models are showing roughly the same thing, which is roughly 50% of the jobs in roughly 20 years.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely an interesting question. It's one that's definitely not getting pondered enough. I know you've talked a bit about wearables and hearables in the past, and the privacy and data associated with that. Where do you see us headed on a consumer tech side of things?
Yeah, there was a lot of excitement about wearables, and every conference, 5 years ago was all about wearables, and the excitement has died down a little bit. I mean, the way I think about wearables is it's the Internet of Things, but it applied to people, Internet of People, and it's sucking data from people, their movements, their health, life signs, and using that data to hopefully provide insights that is useful to the person that is wearing them. It seems that after all of the excitement of wearables, it's mostly coming down to health and fitness, and connecting us to services, whether that is sort of. Hang on, I've got to pause it, otherwise she's going to be listening. All right, now she's not listening. I can say Alexa without her blowing up and trying to say things back to me.
Bezos is listening.
Yes, Bezos is always listening. But being able to put that kind of capability into our ears, that's what I've been calling hearables as opposed to wearables, I think is a really interesting way of bridging between machine intelligence and human intelligence. We live very busy lives, and we need help to get through the day. And being able to cognitively offload tasks, or to get reminders or guidance just whispered into our ear at the right time, I think will be useful. When we finally get lightweight, long battery life, fashionable augmented reality, I think that also is interesting, to be able to help guide us through the day. This becomes the new display. What it means is, your next 150-inch television is a 99-cent app you download from the App Store.
Can people handle that? They walk around with their phones like this as it is.
Well, that's yes. You sort of think, well, what's the implication of that? One, it may help us actually lift our heads up and interact with the world, because I'm not keeping all my digital value trapped inside this rectangular screen. Now I'm able to overlay it on the world. And hopefully it makes me engage more with the physical world again. But the risk is we will be able to, the same way you can customize your home screen on your phone, you will be able to customize your view of the world in ever increasingly sophisticated ways. And so we all think we live in a bubble now. When we live in an augmented reality bubble where our most important sense, our vision, is fully customizable, and I can shield out things I don't want to see, or I can add in things I do want to see. That's one of the things that concerns me.
Yeah, if you're in the KKK, you can make everybody white. You can do all kinds of interesting things that people have never
terrible.
that people have never even thought about. How do we deal with that, where the commons is becoming invaded in a sense? Everything's under surveillance. Nothing is really owned. And my face, my everything is kind of out there for governments and corporations.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, how much benefit do we get as a society, and how much do we have to give up in return? And as individuals, how much benefit do we get versus what we have to give up in return? And I think for companies who are wrestling with this, as they think about, typically when you're dreaming up a new service, a new product, if you want to do something really interesting and meaningful, you have to gather data as fuel to make that product or service work. Whether it is recommendations on Netflix, nice simple thing which gathers your viewing habits, or let's say you want a personalized shopping service, then that store maybe has to observe how you shop. If there's enough benefit in it, great. People want customized products and personalized services, and to deliver a personalized service, let me back up. I should explain the difference between customization and personalization, because people often think they're the same thing. Customization, I express what I want. I want a mocha chocolate latte with extra sprinkles and 130 degrees Fahrenheit, right? I'm expressing what I want. Starbucks gives me what I want. Personalization, I don't say what I want. Someone observes my behavior and infers from that what I might want and gives me that. So people are looking for customized products and personalized experiences. To deliver personalized experiences, you have to gather data in order to be able to start to make decisions on people's behalves and hopefully give them a tailored service. That should always be opt-in. And I think that's for companies wrestling with how far do I go? What data can I gather? Of course, when you gather that data, you have to secure it, handle it appropriately, not use it for unintended purposes. But you need to be transparent about why you're gathering that data, what you're doing with it, what you're not doing with it. And it needs to be an opt-in service. So I think it's a long answer to your question, but so long as there is a fair exchange of value and people feel like I'm giving up this data and in return I am getting this value in return, and that's a fair exchange, and it's all above board and I can see everything and I understand what's going on, then people are generally accepting of that. You break any of those rules and people should rightly say hell no.
Isn't that the same case with climate change, though? It's kind of a great deal until it's not, because it doesn't hurt us enough. Until it does, it kind of is a collective pain versus an individual pain.
Yeah, there's all sorts of human studies about that, right? Where unless you are explicitly individually hurt, you tend to discount stuff.
Yeah. None of us clean the bathroom until the bathroom's disgusting, because other people are using the bathroom too, right?
Right.
It's a super tough call. I know you've talked about the future of transportation a bit, and I imagine you're very keen on that. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and especially any non-consensus ones.
Yeah, our transportation systems are important to economic activity. People spend a lot of time in traffic, and sometimes the downside is someone gets to spend 30 minutes less with their children, or they get stressed. But sometimes it is an ambulance isn't able to get somebody on time. There are lots of things that are kind of mission critical that happen on the transportation system too. Our transportation systems today, especially in big cities, If you have the means to have a car, great. You can get around if you don't mind the traffic. If you don't have the means, it can be a real impediment to you, just to living your life or certainly to getting to work. And so innovation in transportation systems is going to be vital to the future of our cities, to the vibrancies of our cities, to inclusion, so that people can all participate properly in the economy. And I think autonomous platforms are going to be very helpful for that. 93% of car accidents are caused by human error. If we can eliminate some of that, the 1.25 million people that die globally in car accidents, almost half of them pedestrians. If we can limit that, that's great. But I think it's much more interesting in terms of rethinking the way that we move people, goods, services, move trash out of our cities, and to improve the flow of economic activity and human life. So, yeah, I think it's going to be really fascinating to see those deployed. If you look at the cost of an Uber or a Lyft today, you make that vehicle autonomous, and you also make that vehicle electric, which those things are going to happen largely hand in hand. I've seen estimates that you may cut the cost of that Uber ride by a tenth of what it is now. It's a 90% reduction. That's massive. Now, it's not good for the Uber drivers and Lyft drivers of today who are participating in the gig economy and using it to, supplement their income or bridge between jobs, which refer to our previous conversation of 15 minutes ago. But in terms of making transportation more accessible to people that can't drive today, because they're too young, they're too old, they're drunk, they're banned from driving, whatever the reason might be, they have a disability of some sort, I think it's going to increase access to transportation. The other thing that I think is interesting about autonomous platforms is not just that it can take you to a place or a service, it's that it can project that product or service or experience to you. And I think it's going to be a really interesting time for brands to think about, how do I use these platforms to project my brand and deliver products and services to people in new ways? And not just for doing, fancy last mile delivery with little cute robots on the sidewalks, which people are going to very quickly get pissed off with. And we'll talk about that. But to think about, how might I, if I'm Marriott, should I have a mobile autonomous hotel room? If I am a restaurant, should I have a mobile restaurant car? If I am Regal Cinemas, should I have a cinema car that allows me to provide entertainment experiences while people are on the go? The level of innovation, once you have a new platform like that, people are going to stun us by the amount of innovation that they layer on top of it. And that's why I'm interested in it.
You could go even farther. If you're a restaurant, do you even need a restaurant?
Right. Does it decentralize my restaurant completely?
It's a super interesting world. What do you think about especially, I'm pretty big on the scooter sharing. Obviously, it's a bit absurd right now and how it is, but in terms of what it could be for the US is broken in terms of how it's built architecturally. It's just, it's too spread out for it to be really sustainable long term. But the scooters seem to be a decent option in a lot of cities for cutting out a lot of the pollution and car traffic.
Yeah, and I think they're interesting for that last mile or two, right? To connect with public transportation systems for people who are trying to get to work. And and there are a lot of people who will take public transport, whether it's the bus or rapid transit, and then they have to walk another 2 miles to get to their job. To have those scooters to just very inexpensively whisk them back and forth between them, it can be very good for a lot of people. And just for tootling around town here in Portland, we have the scooters. They just came back again last week. We need to make sure that it is done in a responsible way that doesn't diminish city life, though. Having them just left all over the sidewalk, we need a better solution for that. Having them zooming down sidewalks and having old people have to leap out of the way because there's some kid with his headphones on, not paying attention, just wanting to come through. they should be forced to be on the road and ticketed if they're not. So I think it's probably a short to medium term problem, because at the moment, we've not really made it easy for those scooters to be safely anywhere. They're either unsafely on the sidewalks and unsafe for pedestrians, or they're unsafely on the roads because they're unsafe for the riders because they're next to cars. As we go autonomous, we will need a lot less parking and a lot less multi-story parking, but a lot less street parking. You'll have drop-off zones and pickup zones, but you won't need to have all these cars just left there doing nothing for 95% of the time. If you can repurpose that and put in scooter lanes, bike lanes everywhere in a city, I think you alleviate that problem and you separate all those three pieces of traffic.
Do you think people will upregulate their usage, though? So let's play devil's advocate. I need to buy a couple of things. I might want to go to the store once to do it, but now I can order on Amazon this today and that tomorrow, another thing the next day. And that's 3 separate deliveries. Same deal, but applied to groceries, whatever. My car goes out, my car comes back. I don't have to even think about it because there's not really any impact on me, but it impacts everyone else because it clutters the road. Do you think we could have a situation where that gets worse instead of better?
Yeah, and I think there's also, I agree, and I think there's also an argument that as you make individualized autonomous transportation more accessible by cutting the price, slashing the price dramatically, that may destroy traditional public transportation where you've got 50 people in a bus. Now I've got 50 little pods with people all doing their own thing and choking the roads. So yeah, we have to be careful that we find the right balance and we price it appropriately so that we don't, just come up with a new set of problems.
To price it appropriately, does it have to be controlled by all one entity or a governmental entity?
I think cities are going to have to intervene at some point if they need to, right? I mean, city managers are there to protect the health and well-being of their citizens, to help promote economic activity. There's a bunch of roles that they have, and they may need to step in. And one of the tools they have is taxation, of course, but there are other rules that they can set that are designed to create the best living environment possible in our cities. And I think it's too early to tell whether those things will happen or not, but city managers are going to have to be open to stepping in new ways that perhaps they didn't have to in the past.
I know I was listening to a podcast and the guy was saying whenever he's in San Francisco, he always uses Lyft instead of Uber. And not because it's cheaper, it's actually a little bit more expensive, but he doesn't want to help Uber get to that overall monopoly where they kick everyone else out of the market and then just jack up the prices.
Yeah, I personally use Lyft all the time. I don't use Uber either. And everybody has their reasons. Mine is that Lyft will do carbon offsets for every mile that I ride. And I know it's going to cost me more, but I also don't want to fuel just one huge mega vendor. I think it's important that we all, as consumers, think about our vote and we vote with our dollars.
Amazon is that big and large company in Wally. We need to be worried. Speaking of, what technologies worry you the most or have the biggest potential for harm in your view? We'll go outside of AI because I feel like you could say AI and that's kind of applying to everything.
It really is. I mean, AI is because it's the most powerful. Technology is benign, right? It's how we use it, how it shows up in our lives that matters. AI for surveillance. I mean, there are some pretty big downsides to that. I'm trying to think about the other technologies that I spend time with. We've already talked about, the Vegasing of my perception, and the, making everybody look white of my perception. Of augmented reality, which is a longer term risk, but a risk nonetheless. I think as we augment ourselves, whether it is through augmenting our vision or augmenting our intellect, so AR or AI, we hopefully will do that in a way that will elevate us, that will make us more intellectual, that will help us see the world more clearly. I worry that may not happen, that we may become dumber because we offload more and more to our machine intelligence. I used to be able to navigate myself Yeah, when I was younger, people used to call me the pigeon, and the reason they would call me the pigeon is that I could always find my way home. So no matter how late we went out, no matter how many bars we went to, no matter how, this is college days, right? I could always find my way home, and I didn't have Google Maps to do that. Now we've outsourced all of that, right? Our ability to, because we can't be lost, because we have this magical map in our pocket, we don't really pay attention anymore. So do we slowly give up some of our cognitive abilities because we outsource them too much? So it's probably my biggest worry.
We definitely do. The question is just how fast. Is it evolutionarily, or is it individual as well? And it definitely seems to be individual. I don't really need to remember phone numbers anymore. I remember those better than I do directions, because that's super given to me. But it's definitely an interesting question. What, in terms of sci-fi, what do you say we're most headed towards, and which sci-fi or which speculative type fiction, movie, book, etc., has most influenced you, and why?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the movies that have most influenced me as a futurist tend to be the ones that I rail against. So the Terminator, The Matrix, wonderful movies. I loved them, right? Terminator 2, one of my very favorite movies. I thought it was spectacular when it came out in the early 90s. But they do a disservice. They are great entertainment. Hollywood should keep making movies like that. They're awesome. But as a futurist, I'm up against that every day. When I speak to audiences, the word Terminator or Skynet nearly always comes up, because it's made people fearful about the future. And I try and balance against that and offer an optimistic view of the future. Here's how technology might show up. Here's how it might advance our lives, make the world better. So probably it's movies like that that have had the most influence on me, because I want to be the opposite of them. Not that because I think they're bad. I think they're awesome. But Hollywood movies would not be interesting if Arnie dropped out of the future and said, "Hello, everybody. Nice, a cup of tea, anybody?" It would be a really boring story. You have to have that tension. But we shouldn't assume that tension is a portent of the future, and that is reality. Right? We should be cautious about the future and mindful, but not fearful.
Exactly. It's a warning of a possible future. That's how I like to think about it, because if not sci-fi, what exactly is going to tell us to slow down? And the answer is nothing.
Yeah, but it shouldn't slow us down because we're fearful. Right? It should be allegories, and we should be mindful, but to be fearful. I mean, I have people come to my talks and I talk about artificial intelligence and all the amazing things that it'll be able to do, and how it will discover new drugs and help us see the world more completely, and help us design new products that are lighter weight, make these super jets that will be able to take us from one side of the planet to the other in a matter of hours. And what they come away with, because they're thinking about Sarah Connor, is, oh my God, the robots are going to rise up and kill us all. And that's not helpful, because it doesn't allow us to move forward. It doesn't allow us to embrace this technology in our lives and get the benefit from it.
To play devil's advocate, it would be super helpful if they were actually going to rise up and kill us all. But in terms of AI, my thing is, I've never been sold by anyone, regardless of the experts I've spoken with, and a lot of the top experts I think have a similar mind. I don't see how people. What I get upset with is when people say 100% certain AI will never ever be a problem, because when you're dealing with you can't say that, and you also can't really contain. I mean, how do you contain something that's smarter than you and exponentially faster? It seems arrogant to say that all the codes and bugs will be worked out, because you don't know what they are.
Yeah. There's risk in everything, right? 90% of power in France comes from nuclear energy. And
they put them all on the border with Germany. Germany hates it.
Yeah, but that means that they are one of the lowest carbon producing countries on the planet. Now, can atomic energy be used for bad? Yes, we've seen that happen twice in our lives, and we may see it again. I hope not. And we've seen 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. But does that mean we should not have nuclear energy? One could argue maybe. But in the grand scheme of things, is it really helping with the bigger problem of global warming? Yes, absolutely. It's helping with global warming and slowing that down. If we didn't have nuclear energy, it would be even worse than it is today. So I don't think we should deny ourselves AI because we can't guarantee it's 100% safe.
We definitely don't want to deny it. What we want to have is we want to have people looking over the shoulder, trying to poke holes in things before they happen. That clearly didn't happen at Facebook, and then Trump was helpful enough to show us a few little tools and tricks that could happen. And now we have something we never expected because everyone thought it was all good.
Yeah, I think AI, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And I think it is important. I like that organizations like OpenAI exist, and I think we need more organizations like that are asking the right questions. And often commercial pressures mean that shortcuts are taken, and people don't think through how something might end up having unintended consequences. So I promote mindfulness, and not in like a way, but just we need to be really thoughtful when we do things. And as a futurist, I promote asking and answering 2 questions: what's the future we want to build, and what's the future we want to avoid? And they're other sides of the same coin, but we shouldn't just focus on the latter. Let's focus on both of them in equal measure.
Definitely agreed. Go for the great power, but always have a little bit of caution while you're doing it. And in terms of the mindfulness stuff, I would give meditation a try if I were you. I've talked to a lot of the woo-woo people. I'm actually somewhat in that crowd. I do think that there are a lot of benefits, but that's a talk for another time.
Nothing wrong with the woo-woo crowd.
Nothing wrong with the woo-woo crowd. This has been a fun one. Two bald dudes talking future. Steve, I got one last question before you tell people where to find you, and that's you got to leave people with one thing: a quote, a call to action. It can be anything. What is it?
I think it is inspire others to build a better future. And if you found this discussion interesting, and you think being a futurist is interesting, I deputize you as a futurist, because it shouldn't just be people who call themselves futurists who are promoting conversations about the future and thoughtful conversations about the future. So at the next cocktail party, when you talk to your kids, when you talk to your parents, start having these conversations, because it's important that we all participate in the future. Don't leave it to old farts like me. We should all participate in this. So that would be my thought, is we should all participate in inspiring a conversation about how we, not others, how we are going to build a better future.
I like the we, not others part. One of our guests had a great quote. It was something like, most people walk into the future walking backwards, because that's the only thing that they notice and realize and live in. This has been a fun one, Steve. Where can people find you and learn more about you?
Sure. Well, Bold Futurist. It's easy to remember why bold. boldfuturist.com. And if you're interested in getting on my mailing list, you can text BOLD to 345-345. I'm not going to spam you. All you will get on that email is a note when my book comes out in early 2020. So I have a book coming, The Innovation Ultimatum, which is going to explain how 6 technologies will reshape every business in the 2020s. So if you're interested in that book, get on the mailing list, 345-345, and text the word BOLD.
Bald as in a topless head, guys, not bold, but it is also bold as well. Thanks for coming today, Steve.
Hey, pleasure talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Cheers, guys. This was fun.